"Do you forgive the wolf while it's in the middle of slaughtering your sheep?" the president asked, his voice low and steady. "Or do you stand between the wolf and the flock and do what must be done? That isn't vengeance, Father. That is justice." The air on the mountain was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and distant, cold stone. Below, the lake was a vast, placid mirror, reflecting the snow-capped peaks that stood like silent, ancient sentinels. It was a setting for reverence, for quiet contemplation. The annual National Prayer Breakfast, held this year at a secluded lakeside lodge, was meant to be a moment of unity, a pause from the brutal mechanics of politics. President Donald Trump stood on a stone terrace, overlooking the water. He wore a dark, heavy overcoat against the morning chill. His signature bright blue tie a slash of defiant color against the somber black. He listened, his expression unreadable, as the morning's keynote speaker, Father Gabriel, approached the lectern. Father Gabriel was a man whose reputation preceded him. A renowned theologian, his writings on mercy and forgiveness were celebrated in circles both religious and secular. He was handsome, with kind eyes and a calm, reassuring presence. He wore the simple black suit and white clerical collar of his station, a stark contrast to the powerful figures in tailored suits who surrounded him. He began his address with grace, speaking of shared values and common ground. But then, his tone shifted. His gaze, once sweeping across the crowd, settled directly on President Trump. "In our scriptures, we are taught a profound and difficult lesson," Father Gabriel said, his voice resonating with moral authority. "We are taught to turn the other cheek. We are taught that mercy triumphs over judgment. We are commanded to forgive not 7 times, but 70 times 7. A quiet murmur went through the assembled press pool, kept at a respectful distance. This was no longer a general sermon. It was a direct, public challenge. "A nation, like a man, is judged by its capacity for grace," the priest continued, his eyes locked on the president. "To lead with a clenched fist, to harbor grudges against adversaries, to pursue justice without the tempering balm of forgiveness, this is to build a house on sand. It is a path that strays from the light we are all called to follow. I pray our leader finds the strength to forgive, to heal the divisions not by conquering his opponents, but by embracing them." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a perfectly crafted accusation, wrapped in the unimpeachable language of faith. Father Gabriel had just accused the President of the United States of being unchristian in front of the nation's spiritual and political elite. Every eye turned to Trump, waiting for the explosion, the fiery tweet, the sharp-tongued rebuttal. But it never came. The President simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. He held the priest's gaze for a long moment, before turning to an aide. "Arthur," he said, his voice calm, "please ask Father Gabriel if he would join me for a walk. Just the 2 of us." A few minutes later, the 2 men stood side by side, walking slowly along the stone balustrade at the water's edge, away from the cameras and the watching eyes. The mountain stood witness. For a time, neither spoke. Finally, it was Trump who broke the silence. He stopped and gestured toward a small, unadorned wooden cross that rested on a table as part of a simple display. He picked it up. It was light, made of simple raw wood, a stark contrast to the power and wealth surrounding them. He held it in his palm, not like a weapon, but like a question. "Father," he began, his tone respectful, "I listened to every word you said, and I believe, in your heart, you are a good man who spoke with conviction." Father Gabriel inclined his head. "I spoke what I believe the gospel demands of us all, Mr. President." "Of us all," Trump repeated, turning the cross over in his fingers. "And you are right. As a man, as Donald Trump, I am a flawed servant of God, called to forgive those who trespass against me. And in my private life, I do. But you weren't speaking to Donald Trump, the man. You were speaking to the president." He paused, letting the weight of the distinction settle in the crisp air. "My oath, Father, is not to my own salvation first. My oath is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and the people of this nation. The two are not always the same path." He took a step closer, his voice dropping, becoming more intense, more personal. "Let me ask you a question, as a theologian. A shepherd is tasked with protecting his flock. It is his sacred duty. One night, a wolf gets into the fold. It is not just growling, it is attacking the sheep, tearing them apart. These are your sheep, your flock, entrusted to you by God. He held up the cross, its simple shape stark against the majestic backdrop. Do you, as the shepherd, turn the other cheek for the sheep? Do you forgive the wolf while it's in the middle of slaughtering your flock? Or do you stand between the wolf and the sheep and do what must be done? Father Gabriel opened his mouth, but no words came out. The analogy was simple, brutal, and powerful. Fighting that wolf isn't vengeance, Father, Trump continued, his eyes unwavering. It isn't a grudge. It is justice. It is protection. It is the ultimate act of love for the flock you swore to protect. To stand by and preach forgiveness to the wolf is to abandon the sheep. It is the greatest sin a shepherd can commit. Trump signaled to his aide, Arthur, who stepped forward with a thin, leather-bound folder. The president opened it. Inside were not classified documents, but compiled public records. He handed a page to the priest. This isn't about political rivals, Trump said, his voice now quiet but heavy with evidence. This is the wolf's work. Here is a list of factories that closed after a trade deal my, quote, adversaries championed. That's 10,000 families in Ohio alone. Here are the crime statistics from cities that implemented policies I fought against. Not numbers, but the faces of the victims. And here, he handed over another page. Are letters. From farmers who lost their land. From parents who lost their children to drugs that flowed freely across a border they refused to secure. Father Gabriel's hands trembled as he held the papers. He saw the cold, hard data, but he also saw the human cost. He had been standing in a cathedral of theology, debating abstract principles. The president had brought him to the blood and soil of reality. The priest's certainty, once a rock, was now sand, washing away into the cold, deep lake. He looked from the papers to the rugged, determined face of the president, to the simple wooden cross he still held. In that moment he understood. He had misapplied a personal virtue to the brutal, complex responsibilities of a national protector. He had judged the shepherd for fighting the wolf. A profound shame washed over him. His righteous challenge now felt like naive arrogance. He slowly lowered the papers and looked the president in the eye. His own were filled with a sudden, humbling clarity. Mr. President, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I was wrong. I spoke from a place of pride, believing my understanding was complete. I confused the duties of a priest, who heals the repentant, with the duties of a president, who must stop the unrepentant. Please, forgive me. President Trump did not smile in triumph. He simply placed a firm, reassuring hand on the priest's shoulder. There is nothing to forgive, Father, he said, his voice softening. You spoke from your heart. Today we both see the world a little more clearly. Together they turned and walked back toward the breakfast gathering, the silence between them no longer one of tension, but of profound, unspoken understanding. The crowd saw them approaching, the theologian and the warrior, and could only wonder what prayer had been answered on the mountain that morning. What do you think was the most powerful part of the president's argument that changed Father Gabriel's mind? Share your thoughts in the discussion below. And if you enjoy stories about conviction and leadership, don't forget to subscribe.